Hello folks, we're going to have a look at this secondary data 20 marker. It hasn't come up on A level before, but it did come up on AS in 2019. So I think it's a really hard 20. So I think there's a really strong likelihood you will get it. That and practical issues, which I will have gone through in class. So reference to sociological studies, you have to give the examiner 2. We teach you 6, but you have to give them 2, and you absolutely must reference the item. Even if it doesn't tell you in these 20s, you must reference the item. If you don't, you will lose 3 marks, or you won't gain 3 AO2 marks. So 2 studies, reference to the item, otherwise you're going to lose 3 AO2 marks, as I've said. So this is the one where you do the pervert structure. So okay, going to start practical, ethical, rep and gen, valid, examples, reliability, theory. In the theory paragraph, we always start with a definition. Secondary data is data produced by another source. It's data produced by another source. It's data that already exists. So it's data produced by another source, so not the researcher. And the data that already exists. Examples are official statistics, diaries, and newspapers or newspaper articles. So secondary data is data that already exists. It's data produced by another source. Here are some examples. They love a definition. I know that from the mark schemes, so always try and put a definition. Theory, in this example with secondary sources, they can be both primary, no they can't, they can be both quantitative or qualitative. So because it can be both, for the theory section, I'm going to say secondary sources are favoured by both positivists. They're favoured by both positivists, as you can take a macro approach, large scale. You can take a macro approach or large scale by using official statistics. And it enables you to establish patterns and trends. So it's favoured by positivists because with something like official statistics, you can take a macro approach and you can establish key patterns and trends. You could also reference that over time as well if you wanted to. Just because I run out of room. It's also used by interpretivists. So I might actually phrase it so it references the question. Interpretivists also use secondary sources like qualitative diaries. Interpretivists also use secondary sources but more qualitative diaries, so expressed in text or words, as this enables an understanding of an individual's meanings and individual motives. You can also establish, also gain Verstehen, or deep understanding. So all of that is paragraph 1, although you might have planned it maybe it's the last one, that's paragraph 1. Definition, theory, positivism and interpretivism. Examiner sees that, they're very impressed. Clearly you have read the mark schemes, you understand they want a definition, and they really do expect to see theory well explained with either patterns or trends or individual meanings and motives. Practical issues. So here's time, money, access. Oops. So secondary sources have the benefit of being free, easy to access, and widely available. Secondary sources have the benefit of being free, easy to access, and widely available. For example, official statistics can provide access to large samples or large representative samples that account for key differences based on class, gender, and ethnicity. For example, official statistics can provide access to very large samples, to samples of people that account for key differences based on class, gender, ethnicity. And, as shown in the item, they can provide data on historical events, and you can use them. These can be used to draw comparisons They can provide data on historical events, and these can be used to draw comparisons and again see changes in any patterns or trends. So now you haven't got the item there, but it was hinting at historical comparisons, hence why I've used it there. It's because we're kind of running out of room. But with diaries are a secondary, let me check the question. Diaries, oh, so I was going to say secondary method. So diaries are a diaries produce secondary data. And Rose Neal uses these to gain an understanding of the everyday experiences of individuals in LAT relationships. Couples who live apart who are together, just to remind you. She uses these to gain an understanding of the everyday experiences of people in LAT relationships. Secondary data provides access to these details. So secondary data provides access to these details that otherwise could not be obtained. So diaries are used as a secondary data source here in order to understand the daily experiences of people in LAT relationships. Literature reviews are a review or a large-scale review of secondary sources. It means researchers can ask more informed questions increasing the validity of data. So I'm just going to take that a little bit from the 30 marker. Literature reviews are a large-scale review of secondary sources or secondary data. I keep saying sources, but the question is data. Researchers can ask more informed questions, and thus it increases the validity. However, they're incredibly time-consuming and can create bias, reducing the objectivity and decreasing the validity as a result. So just kind of ties in a little bit to money. I'm going to do cost actually. So that one's time. So it is time consuming. Literature reviews also have additional costs, as you often need a paid subscription to access. So done access to samples, money and time. Paragraph 2, quite a big paragraph. Right, ethical issues. The benefit of using secondary data is that in the original research, they would have obtained informed consent. So in the original research, they would have obtained informed consent, would have given anonymity and pseudonyms. So no names or details. And it's likely they will have adhered to the British Sociological Association's guidelines. They would have adhered to the British Sociological Association's guidelines, ensuring respondents are protected from harm. And provided secondary data is referenced, there is no need to obtain consent to use this data. So basically what I'm saying is the original data was probably adhered to those ethical issues, so I can explore those. Or ensuring that respondents are protected from harm, and that responses are valid, and that responses are valid, knowing they're protected. So basically you're more likely to answer correctly if you know you're going to be protected from harm. And also if you reference the secondary data that you've used, there's also no need for the researcher to obtain consent to use it. So again, easily done. However, as it is produced by another source, there is no way to guarantee that ethical codes were adhered to. However, as it was obtained by another source, there's no way to guarantee that the ethical codes were adhered to. And secondary data might be used in ways not originally intended. For example, a content analysis on a newspaper article to measure the use of racist stereotypes. So, for example, content analysis on a newspaper article to measure the use of racial stereotypes might not be used in a way the writer intended. So basically, I'll try and explain it. You might do a content analysis and count the number of racist language or stereotypes used in an article about a Muslim male. You might count the number of times it uses the word terrorism. But that might not be the way that the original writer of that article intended it. And it's unlikely that you will have obtained consent. When you do content analysis, you just count the number of words used, but you don't obtain consent from the person who wrote it because it's a public document. Okay, so Rec and Gen. So with this one, we're going to go back to kind of official statistics. So some secondary data accesses very large representative samples. Very large representative samples. So for example, the Crime Survey for England and Wales conducts a survey on 80,000 households. This means that secondary data can access large samples, so you can generalize or apply these results. So secondary data, like the Crime Survey for England and Wales, gives you access to very large representative samples, and it means you can generalize or apply those results. However, again, because it's produced by another source, again, it can't be guaranteed. So yeah, it can't be guaranteed. Quite right. Can't be guaranteed. Oops. Okay. So then we're going to do validity. We're going to go back to our kind of qualitative point here. So for validity, we're going to note that secondary data, let's just check that's what it says, from diaries are more valid. They allow respondents or respondents have produced or have explored a topic using their own words, and they don't have to approximate answers. So secondary sources in the form of diaries tend to be more valid because you've explored it in your own words and you haven't had to approximate. You may have used open questions, and it allows for Verstehen or deep understanding. I'm going to put my second study in here. Secondary sources. Oops. Secondary data also allows for, or data also provides understanding on a topic. So in Jackson's study of lad culture, she uses the NUS secondary data to find the extent of the problem. Again, patterns and trends. And uses this to explore, and she uses these secondary data to explore further in her focus groups and interviews. So it's used to check the validity or to prompt others' responses. Again, just going to make a note here. However, any secondary data that originally used closed questions are less likely to be valid, as you have to approximate answers. So just a little, I know I'm kind of repeating the same point there, but just to stress it a little bit. Okay, examples I've given 2 studies and I've incorporated the item, so we don't do it as a paragraph. I have incorporated it in it, so don't do it as a paragraph. Right, reliability is the last one. Reliability. So some secondary data, like a content analysis, can be repeated and the results are likely to be the same or similar. This is because a researcher is likely to count the same number of words. So in a content analysis, you count the number of words in a piece of text. This is like, as researchers like to count the same number of words and draw the same conclusions as a result. Could say, however, qualitative secondary data. However, qualitative secondary data does not have the benefit of being easily repeated to get the same responses in future. Just to give it a little bit of evaluation. It's quite a tricky one. I've tried to, when it's given you kind of secondary sources or secondary data, I keep saying sources, that's why you need to keep checking the question. The secondary data, it's important that you keep coming back to how broad it can be. So see it as both qualitative and quantitative to get the range. As always, any questions, let me know. But I think secondary data is quite likely, along with something like practical issues. We've got to really prepare for these very tricky 20s so that you're going to smash that exam on the 7th. Thanks, folks.